The laughter started before the waiter set the cake down. My sister Natalie raised her wine glass and smiled at the table like she was about to give a speech. My parents leaned in, grinning. It was their 30th anniversary dinner and everyone was happy, ready to celebrate. Then Natalie spoke. "While I'm arguing multimillion-dollar cases at my firm," she announced loudly, "my little sister is playing business owner on the internet." She laughed like it was the funniest thing she had heard all week. My father shook his head. "That cute little candle hobby is perfect for you, Lila. Ideal for someone who couldn't handle a real career." More laughter. My mother covered her mouth, pretending to hide her smile. Then Natalie delivered her final line, the one that burned deepest. "Don't worry, Mom and Dad. If the family ever goes broke, Lila can sell us scented candles for emotional support." The whole table erupted. Strangers nearby glanced over. I sat very still. My hands were in my lap. My chest felt tight. Then quietly I said the words I had swallowed for years. "It's not a hobby. It's a business." Nobody heard me. Or maybe they just didn't care. My name is Lila Bennett. That night I stopped trying to earn their approval. Growing up in the Bennett house meant growing up in Natalie's shadow. She was 3 years older, and from the time she could read, my parents treated her like she was destined for greatness. Top grades. Debate team captain. Scholarship offers before senior year. Natalie could do no wrong. I was different. Quieter. More creative. While Natalie studied law textbooks, I filled sketchbooks with designs. While she won trophies, I made handmade gifts for friends and sold crafts at school fairs. My parents called my projects phases. They said it with a smile, but that word stung every time. When Natalie graduated from law school and joined a prestigious firm, my parents threw her a party that filled the entire backyard. When I launched my online decor brand from our garage 2 years later, my father patted my shoulder and said, "That's sweet, honey. Just make sure you have a backup plan." I told myself it didn't matter. I would prove them wrong quietly without drama or arguments. I would build something real and let the results speak louder than their doubts. What I didn't know then was how long that would take, or how much it would cost me in the meantime. What my family didn't know was that my little hobby had already become something much bigger. Started with one video. I filmed myself making a minimalist concrete vase in my garage, posted it online, and woke up to thousands of views. Then the orders came. First 10, then 50, then hundreds. Within 6 months I had a waiting list. Within a year I had hired 3 people to help keep up with demand. My handcrafted home decor pieces, clean lines, natural materials, simple but striking designs, had found an audience my family never imagined existed. Influencers tagged me. Interior design bloggers featured my work. One post from a well-known home stylist brought more orders in a single day than I used to fill in a whole month. I moved out of the garage and into a small studio. Proper packaging. A part-time assistant. Real systems. But every time my parents called and asked how things were going, I said, "Fine. Staying busy." I never shared the numbers. Something about their constant doubt had trained me to protect my wins. I feared that if I shared good news, they would find a way to shrink it. So I kept building quietly and kept everything to myself. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, while I was packing orders at my studio. It was from a buyer at Harlow Home, a national home goods retail chain with stores in every major city. They had been watching my brand grow online. They loved the aesthetic. They wanted to discuss carrying my products in over 200 stores. I read the email 3 times. Then I sat down on the floor because my legs felt suddenly weak. This was the kind of opportunity small business owners dreamed about for years. A deal like this could transform my brand from a popular online shop into a real nationwide company. Bigger production, more staff, wider reach, serious revenue. I wanted to call someone. I wanted to shout with excitement. But as I reached for my phone, I thought about who I would actually call. My first instinct was my mother. Then I remembered the anniversary dinner. My father's joke. Natalie's voice, so smooth and certain, dismissing everything I had built in a single sentence. I put my phone down. Instead, I called my lawyer to review the terms and my accountant to look at the numbers. I quietly began preparing for the biggest opportunity of my life, without telling a single member of my family. Not yet. 2 weeks into preparing for the Harlow Home deal, something stopped me cold. I was reviewing competitor brands in the market standard research before any major retail pitch when I came across a new company. The brand was called Marin & Company, launched only 8 months earlier. Their products were minimalist home decor pieces made from natural materials. Concrete vases, woven wall hangings, ceramic candle holders. My designs, or something terrifyingly close to them. I leaned closer to my screen. The shapes were slightly different, the names changed. But the overall aesthetic I had spent years carefully building was right there in front of me. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The trademark filings for Marin & Company had been processed through a legal firm downtown. A firm I recognized immediately because Natalie had mentioned it many times. It wasn't her firm directly, but it was closely linked through a shared professional partnership. I told myself I was being paranoid. Many designers worked in the minimalist space, but I couldn't let it go. I took screenshots of everything. I saved the trademark documents. I created a folder on my desktop and labeled it simply, Watch. Something felt very wrong, and I had learned to trust that feeling. I didn't want to believe what I was beginning to suspect, so I decided to test it carefully. The next Sunday, our family had brunch at my parents' house. I waited until Natalie and I were alone in the kitchen, then brought it up casually. I saw this new decor brand online, I said, washing my hands at the sink. Marin & Company. Have you heard of them? Their products look weirdly similar to mine. Natalie was slicing fruit at the counter. She didn't stop cutting. Didn't look up. Ideas in business belong to whoever executes them best, she said. Calm. Almost bored. I turned to look at her. That's an interesting thing to say. She shrugged and glanced at me briefly, a small smile at her lips. Don't be so sensitive, Lila. Inspiration comes from everywhere. That's how creative industries work. She picked up the fruit platter and walked back to the dining room like the conversation was already over. I stood in the kitchen alone, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. It wasn't just what she said that unsettled me. It was what she didn't say. She hadn't asked which company I meant. She hadn't asked why it concerned me. She already knew exactly what I was talking about. 3 weeks after that brunch, my father called on a Wednesday evening. His voice was different, tight and controlled in a way that told me he was working hard not to panic. We need a family meeting, he said. This weekend. It's important. I arrived Saturday to find my mother at the dining table with her hands folded and my father standing near the window, unable to settle. The news was serious. His business partner of 18 years, a man named Gordon, had been formally accused of financial fraud by 3 former clients. The investigation had been running quietly for months, but now it was official. Authorities were examining company accounts, including ones my father had co-managed and signed off on. Banks were asking questions. Lawyers were already involved. The family business, a mid-sized property management company my father had spent 20 years building, was suddenly standing at the edge of a cliff. My mother looked older than I had ever seen her. My father kept clearing his throat. I sat across from them and listened carefully. I asked calm, measured questions. And quietly in the back of my mind, I began to understand that everything was about to change for all of us. Natalie arrived at the family meeting 40 minutes late. She walked in carrying a leather folder and wearing her full courtroom expression. Serious. Confident. Already in charge before she even sat down. My parents' faces changed the moment she appeared. The tension in my mother's shoulders dropped. My father straightened up like someone had switched the lights back on in the room. I've already spoken to 2 partners at my firm, Natalie announced, setting her folder on the table. We're handling the legal defense. Don't worry. This situation is manageable. My parents looked at her the way they always had. Like she was the answer to every hard problem. Like the room was safer simply because she was in it. My father nodded, relief washing over his face. My mother reached across and squeezed Natalie's hand. We don't know what we'd do without you, she whispered. Natalie smiled. The warm smile of someone who understood exactly how much power she held in any room. I sat on the other side of the table. Quiet. Invisible. Exactly as I had always been in that house. Nobody asked if I had thoughts. Nobody considered whether my financial knowledge could help. I was still just Lila, the one with the candle hobby. I said nothing. I simply watched and remembered every detail. Later that afternoon, when the serious part of the meeting ended and my mother made tea, the mood loosened slightly. Natalie leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and looked across the table at me with a very familiar expression. "You know," she said, swirling her cup slowly, "if the business really does collapse, maybe Lila can sell candles at the bankruptcy auction. Add a little ambience to the whole disaster." My father let out a short laugh. My mother smiled into her cup. The same joke, word for word. And they still laughed. I put my cup down gently on its saucer. I didn't say anything sharp. Didn't raise my voice. I simply pushed back my chair, picked up my bag and stood. "I have an early morning tomorrow," I said. "I'll see you all soon." "Lila, don't be dramatic," my mother started. But I was already walking toward the door. I said a quiet goodbye. Hugged nobody. Left. Sitting in my car outside, I didn't cry. I had moved past tears when it came to my family. What I felt instead was something harder and cleaner. A cold, quiet kind of clarity. They were never going to change. So it was finally time for me to stop waiting for them to. The Harlow home contract was finalized on a Thursday morning in early spring. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office with my hand completely steady. The agreement covered distribution across 214 stores nationwide, with a guaranteed minimum order that would more than triple my annual revenue. Provisions for exclusive seasonal collections and potential international expansion in year 2 were also included. My lawyer shook my hand and said simply, "Lila, this is a big deal." He wasn't someone who said things for effect. He meant it fully. I walked out into the bright morning air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. I thought about the garage, the first video, the waiting lists, the nights I packaged orders alone at 2 in the morning, while my family assumed I was still figuring things out. Then I called my studio manager Petra and told her to bring the whole team together. We needed to talk about scaling production immediately. That evening, alone in my apartment, I let the weight of what had happened settle into my chest. Not pride exactly. Something deeper. Proof. Real, documented, undeniable proof that the thing they had called a hobby had become something that truly mattered. And still I told no one in my family. Not yet. The warning came from an unexpected place. Her name was Nina, and she ran a boutique sourcing agency that connected small brands with retail buyers. I had met her at a trade show the previous year. She called on a Friday afternoon, her tone careful from the very first word. "Lila, I need to tell you something." I went back and forth about calling at all. I stopped what I was doing and sat down. She told me that Marin and Company had been actively pitching to buyers across the market, including some of the same buyers I had spoken to before the Harlow home deal closed. Their products were strikingly similar to mine. But what concerned Nina more was what she had uncovered about the company's background. The legal structure was built through a firm closely tied to someone named Natalie Bennett, she said carefully. "I wasn't sure if that name meant anything to you." I was quiet for a long moment. "She's my sister," I said. Nina exhaled slowly. "I'm so sorry, Lila. I thought you should know." I thanked her. I ended the call. Then I opened my laptop and went directly to the folder labeled Watch. It was time to stop watching and start acting. 2 days later, an anonymous message arrived through my business email. The sender said they had worked briefly for Marin and Company during its early stage. They gave no name, but described specific details about the company's founding that only an insider could know. They said the brand had been built using design samples shared by someone connected to a law firm, and that those samples were used as reference points for the entire product line. They also said the same legal contact had helped the company gain early introductions to retail buyers, a process that normally took years of careful relationship building. I read the message several times. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer with a short note. "Start building a file." I also reached out to a private investigator my lawyer recommended, someone who specialized in intellectual property cases. I didn't want emotion driving what happened next. I wanted facts. Documented, verified, impossible to deny facts. That week I kept showing up at my studio every single day. I managed the Harlow home production timeline and kept my team steady. Nobody around me knew what was building beneath the surface. But I knew. And I was completely prepared to be as patient as the situation required. 3 weeks before the official Harlow home launch, Everything shifted publicly in a way I hadn't planned for. A celebrity interior designer named Zara Cole posted a photo of her newly remodeled home studio on a Sunday morning. In the background, clearly visible on 2 shelves, were 6 of my pieces. She hadn't tagged me, but her followers did, flooding her comments with my brand name within the hour. By the time I woke up and checked my phone, my website had already crashed from the traffic surge. Zara reposted with a full tag and a paragraph calling my work the most honest and beautiful design she had discovered in years. Her post reached millions of people. My phone didn't stop buzzing for 3 full days. Press requests, wholesale inquiries, interview invitations. A major home design publication reached out about a feature. Harlow Homes sent a message saying the timing couldn't have been better. Their marketing team wanted to build the entire launch campaign around my brand's story. I allowed myself one small private moment of real joy. Then I went straight back to work. Marin & Company had started pitching to 3 retailers I knew personally, and my investigator had evidence that needed careful organizing. While my world was growing, my family's world was shrinking fast. My father called during the 3rd week of the Harlow Home media coverage. He mentioned the press briefly before moving to the real reason he had called. The fraud investigation had gotten much worse. Gordon had been formally charged. Prosecutors were examining all financial records, including accounts my father had signed off on. A civil lawsuit from investors had been filed. 2 major properties were frozen by court order, meaning no income from those assets while the case remained unresolved. The company's bank credit line had been cut significantly. My mother had quietly started selling personal items, jewelry, furniture collected over many years. Small private signs of a life tightening at the edges. My father's voice on the phone was tired in a way I had never heard before. He was a proud man, and hearing him sound that way was genuinely painful, even after everything between us. "It's getting very complicated," was all he said. I told him to keep me informed and kept my voice steady. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a long moment. The family that had laughed at my candle hobby was now quietly running out of options. And I was the only one still standing on solid ground. Natalie's fall began quietly, the way most serious falls do. Her law firm released a short statement about an internal review into the professional conduct of several associates connected to an intellectual property case. Careful, formal language, the kind used when a firm needs to investigate without causing alarm. But word travels fast in legal circles. A contact of mine who worked in the same building sent me a brief message. "Is your sister okay? There's talk going around." I wasn't surprised. My investigator had already delivered a preliminary report showing the legal structure behind Marin & Company was directly connected to work Natalie had done for a specific client. She had used that relationship to give the competing brand access to buyers and professional resources they should never have had. The core problem was clear. Some of those resources included confidential market research gathered through her client's work, research that touched directly on design trends almost identical to my brand's style. This wasn't simply unfair competition. It was a clear ethical violation, possibly something worse in the eyes of the law. I didn't call Natalie. She had been given many chances to treat me with basic decency and had chosen mockery every time. Her consequences were arriving. I simply let them come. My mother called on a Thursday evening, and from the very first sound of her voice I knew something had genuinely shifted. She didn't start with complaints or small talk. She said my name softly and carefully, the way she used to when I was a child and needed to listen closely. "Lila, we need to talk." I sat down. "Okay, Mom. I'm listening." She told me she had been reading about my company online, the Harlow Home press coverage, the design publication feature. She said she had shown it to my father, and he had gone very quiet for a long time before finally speaking. Then she said the words I had never expected to hear. "We didn't understand what you were building. We should have. And I'm sorry we laughed." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence sit between us. She continued, her voice thinner now. "Your father and I are in a difficult place. The business may not survive. And Natalie, well, we're not sure where things are heading for her either. We're not asking you to fix everything. We just wanted you to know the truth." I thanked her for calling. I kept my voice kind. Then I told her I would think carefully about how I could help. I drove to my parents' house the following Sunday for the first time in weeks. Everything looked the same from the outside. Same front garden. Same curtains. But when my mother opened the door, the grandfather clock that had stood in the hallway my entire life was gone. Sold, I assumed. My father was in the living room. He stood when I walked in, which he rarely did. He looked older. Not just tired, but genuinely humbled in a way that changed his whole face. "Lila," he said. Just my name. But the way he said it felt completely different. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us. No performance. No audience. No ranking of who mattered more. My mother set down 3 cups of tea and folded her hands, looking at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. I asked specific questions about the legal situation, showing I understood business and finance. My father answered all of them without talking down to me. At one point he stopped and said, "How do you know so much about this?" I looked at him steadily. "I've been running a business for years, Dad. I learned entirely on my own, because nobody thought I needed support." He looked at the table. He didn't argue. My investigator delivered his final report on a Monday morning. It was 31 pages of thorough documentation, trademark records, email chains obtained through legal disclosure, written statements from 2 former employees of Marin & Company. The conclusion was clear. The brand had been built using design references taken directly from early samples of my product line. Those samples had been shared by a contact at Natalie's firm during a private client meeting 18 months earlier. The contact had since left the firm, but the complete paper trail remained perfectly intact. Natalie hadn't founded Marin & Company herself, but she had helped someone build it using information she could only access through her professional position. In doing so, she violated her firm's conflict of interest policies and potentially several intellectual property laws. The brand never gained serious market traction, partly because my brand was already so deeply established, and partly because the Harlow Home Partnership had secured the key retail relationships they were chasing. Marin & Company had quietly stopped all operations 3 weeks before the report arrived on my desk. I sat with the document for a full hour before calling my lawyer. Then I called Petra and confirmed we were proceeding with the full production schedule as planned. Business first. Everything else would follow in its proper order. Natalie's firm made their announcement on a Tuesday. A short, formal statement posted on their website explaining that an associate had been released following an internal review of professional conduct. No details. No names. But everyone who needed to know already knew. My phone buzzed with messages from 3 relatives I barely spoke to, all asking if I had heard the news. I replied to none of them. Natalie texted me that same evening. Her message was short. "I know you know. Call me." I placed my phone face down on my desk and didn't pick it up again until morning. When I finally called her back, she didn't apologize. She said the situation was more complicated than it looked. She said she had only made an introduction and hadn't anticipated how things would develop. I listened to everything without interrupting. Then I said calmly and clearly, "Natalie, you used my designs to help someone compete against me. You knew exactly what you were doing." Silence. "And years before that," I continued, "you convinced Mom and Dad not to invest in my startup. I know that too." More silence. "I'm not calling to fight," I told her. "I'm calling so you understand that I know everything." Then I hung up. 2 weeks after Natalie left her firm, my company closed a second major deal. A small but well-connected investment group had been studying my brand since the Zara Cole post went viral. They had spent 6 months reviewing my financials, production capacity, customer retention data, and early Harlow Home results. They wanted to invest. The deal valued my company at several $1,000,000 and included capital for a new fulfillment center, international shipping infrastructure, and a dedicated creative team for developing new product lines. I signed the agreement in my studio at my own workbench, surrounded by shelves of products I had once made entirely by hand in my parents' garage. My company was now worth more than my father's business had been at its very peak, before the investigation swallowed everything he had built. I didn't celebrate loudly. I ordered dinner for my whole team, turned on music, and spent the afternoon working alongside everyone, packing orders and reviewing schedules. That evening I allowed myself one moment of complete stillness. I sat at my workbench in the quiet studio, and let the reality of what I had built settle fully into my chest. Nobody had handed any of this to me. Nobody had believed in it before I did. And now it was mine. Completely. Undeniably. Entirely mine. They started coming one by one. An aunt who had once told me I needed to get serious about life sent a message asking if I had advice for her daughter who wanted to start a small business. A cousin who had ignored me at every holiday for years left warm comments on my brand's posts and sent a private message saying how proud the whole family was of me. An uncle who ran a small hardware store asked if we could meet for coffee to talk about brand strategy. I recognized exactly what was happening. The moment success becomes impossible to ignore, the people who doubted you quietly rewrite the history. Suddenly they had believed in you all along. I was polite to everyone. I replied with short, warm messages. I did not pretend to forget. But I refused to let their new warmth erase the cold years that came before it. Real respect is not announced at the moment of someone's success. It is given freely when there is absolutely nothing to gain from it. What my relatives were offering now wasn't respect. It was recognition. And I had already learned the important difference between those two things. My father called again in early autumn and asked if we could meet privately at the coffee shop near our old neighborhood. He was already seated when I arrived, both hands around his mug, eyes steady but careful. We ordered. We made small talk. Then he set his cup down and said what he had actually come to say. Your mother and I have been working with our lawyer. There may be a way to save the core of the business. The main property contracts are still solid. If we could restructure and bring in a strategic partner with real financial backing, we might survive this. He paused. We were hoping you might consider being that partner. I looked at him for a quiet moment. Dad, I said finally, I want to help. I genuinely do. But this would be a professional arrangement. Not a family favor. Not a gift. If I put my resources and credibility behind your company, I need full transparency into your finances. Clear accountability. And I need both you and Mom to acknowledge honestly what the past several years have looked like from where I was standing. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. That's fair, he said. More than fair. The family meeting that followed was unlike any before. My parents sat together on one side of the table. Natalie sat to their left, arms folded, expression guarded. I sat across from all three of them with a folder in front of me, and my lawyer quietly on the phone. I began by placing a printed summary of my investigator's full report on the table. This documents what happened with Marin and Company, I said evenly. It shows the direct connection between that brand and Natalie's professional contacts. It also shows my designs were used without my knowledge or permission. My father picked up the pages. As he read, his expression darkened. My mother pressed her hand over her mouth. Natalie stared at the table. Years before this, I continued, Natalie advised Mom and Dad not to invest in my startup. Not because it was a bad investment. Because she didn't want competition, even from her own sister. The room went completely silent. My father looked directly at Natalie. Is that true? She didn't answer for a long moment. Then quietly she said, I made some bad decisions. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the first time in my entire life I heard my sister admit she had done something wrong. For now that was enough. I gave myself a full week before making my final decision. I thought through every angle carefully. On the financial side, my accountant confirmed that helping restructure my father's company was a manageable risk, given my current position. The personal side was considerably harder. In the end, it came down to one clear question. What kind of person did I want to be? Not what they deserved. Not what would make the best story. What kind of person did I genuinely choose to be? I chose to help, but only on my own terms. I became a strategic investor in what remained of my father's company. A formal seat at the decision-making table. My name on the paperwork. Any significant change required my direct input. Not charity. A real business relationship with clear expectations and real consequences. My parents agreed to every condition without argument. As for Natalie, I didn't cut her out of my life. But I made it plain, privately and firmly, that our relationship had changed permanently. No more silence when she was cruel. No more pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. She was still my sister. I didn't stop caring. But I stopped protecting her from the results of her own choices. That boundary changed everything between us in ways no argument ever could. Months passed. Then a full year. My brand kept growing. The Harlow Home Partnership performed beyond every projection. The investment deal funded a new product line that launched in spring and sold out in 2 weeks. I hired 12 new people and moved into a larger studio with a design lab and showroom. My father's company survived. Smaller now, stripped back to its healthiest parts. Standing. Paying its debts. Moving forward. My mother called more often. She stopped waiting for milestones. Sometimes she called just to share something small that reminded her of me. It wasn't a perfect relationship, but it was an honest one, and that mattered far more. Natalie was rebuilding her career at a smaller firm across town. We had dinner once. Quiet and careful but real. She told me she was sorry. No explanation. No justification. Just, "I'm sorry, Lila. I treated you badly for a long time." I accepted it. Not because it erased everything, but because holding on to it would only weigh me down. The real victory was never their apology. It wasn't even the success. It was the life I had built entirely on my own terms, quietly, stubbornly, without their approval, and the peace I found when I realized fully and permanently that I had never needed it at all.